In the spring of 2019, over the course of 39 days, citizens of the world's largest democracy took to the polls. When it was all over, some 600 million voters had delivered a dramatic result, an electoral landslide for the polarizing incumbent. With an unprecedented parliamentary majority behind him, can Narendra Modi deliver on the economic promises that carried him to power, or will his strident brand of Hindu nationalism undermine India's secular democracy? India and Pakistan, next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. DELAVAN Foundation.
India is the world's largest democracy and a beacon for freedom in an increasingly authoritarian region.
India is the largest democracy in the world, and it is among also one of the poorer countries. In that context, India is very important.
It's a country which has the second largest Muslim population in the world. It has one of the oldest Jewish populations, the oldest Jewish, religious places in the world. It has a significant Christian population. You have all kinds of religion. We've had a woman prime minister. They've had a Sikh prime minister. You've had all religions represented.
In 1975, India amended its constitution, establishing a secular democratic republic. Modi's critics charge that he is undermining this tradition.
We are going to ensure Modi government get a taste of what it would happen to betray young India.
The Indian Constitution, which was finished just a few years after Indian independence, was a very bold effort to turn around many of the inequalities of India, to establish a democratic system, and to call India a secular nation.
Right from the 1950s, there has been a grassroots movement of creating a large-scale Hindu identity that would be reflected in politics.
There's a strand of Hindu nationalism that is always there, and let's not forget that it was actually this group called RSS, Rashtriya Sevak Sangh, and the member of that group that kills Mahatma Gandhi. And it is because they feel that Gandhi is against the Hindu majority nation. And then Modi comes along, who has been a member of RSS.
What had been the feeling among a lot of the Hindus was that the Congress party had gone too far in the other direction and the majority was being undermined. And that is the sort of view that the Modi government actually picked up.
In an era of resurgent nationalism worldwide, Modi has embraced the Hindu nationalist ideology.
The broader trend in the world has given him every incentive to just say, well, I might as well just be an totally unconstrained Hindu nationalist, because that's kind of what I see around me. I see Xi Jinping up here, I see Donald Trump over there, I see Vladimir Putin up there. This is what's happening, and so I'm just going to be one of these strongmen.
All this madness and frenzy is being driven by a new philosophy or a new doctrine, which is ascendant in India right now. It is called Hindutva, a reincarnation of fascism in the 21st century. They want a pure India, a pure South Asia, where there would be no Muslims, no Christians, no Sikhs, no Buddhists.
My belief is that he overall does not want India to become a basket case like most ethno-religious states become. And that while he's relying on it, and it might be a dangerous game, that he's not going to start enshrining policies and make changes that fundamentally damage India's democracy or make it unsafe for minorities to be citizens in India.
The Indian National Congress, which long dominated Indian politics, now controls so few seats that it is not even eligible to become the official opposition party.
It was Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, who had some of the original ideology and the ideas of the Congress Party, but it was On the political side, it was the Nehru family. It was Jawaharlal Nehru, the first prime minister he became after independence. Now, what happened is from Nehru's time until really not so long ago by historical standards, the Congress Party dominated Indian politics.
The Congress Party under Indira Gandhi tried to centralize rule in a federal country, intervened in local level politics in a way that absolutely backfired.
Part of the reason for Modi's resounding success has as much to do with weakness of the Congress Party.
India's nationalist turn has sent shockwaves throughout South Asia, bringing the possibility of renewed conflict into a region where the two main players, India and Pakistan, are both nuclear powers.
When India became independent of the British Empire, the arrangement under which it became independent is that the Muslim majority states of India would be part of Pakistan, and the Hindu parts of India would be part of India. That's the origin of the crisis, but over which now 3 wars have been fought. A lot of terrorist infiltration has happened. A very, very significant problem, and one that continues to menace.
Even our limited engagement between India and Pakistan could escalate to the nuclear level and could lead to an Armageddon, in fact, which would be disastrous not just for the two countries, India and Pakistan, but for the entire globe.
Positioned on the border between India and Pakistan, Kashmir is at the crossroads of Indian nationalist politics and foreign policy.
The Indian Constitution divides a federal system of states, very much in the way that the United States is. Kashmir was born at the time of independence in a region of the country which was primarily Muslim. Kashmir kept a special status all of these years. So the article that governed them, Article 370 of the Constitution, gave Kashmir autonomy in a way that the other states did not have.
The United Nations Security Council mandated that the future of the state would be decided by its own people through a referendum under the auspices of the United Nations. That referendum was agreed by India and Pakistan, but later on, India reneged, and up to this day, the Security Council resolutions have not been implemented.
You have the RSS, this Hindu nationalist vanguard that sees it as the expression of a very, I think, ugly and sectarian form of politics. Those are people who've never liked the autonomy arrangement for Kashmir and have always wanted to seize control of Kashmir and take a more belligerent approach towards Pakistan.
The issue came to a head in August of 2019 when Modi revoked Article 370, which had allowed Kashmir a large degree of autonomy.
Whether you like it or not, it's fully within their national rights, and no one in this country that I can think of is going to challenge that.
The situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir is horrendous. August the 5th, India invaded the territory. It reoccupied the territory. It tried to establish its direct writ over the territory, and this territory doesn't belong to India, and they have tried to colonize it. They announced that from that point onwards, the basic inalienable rights of the Kashmiris would be taken away.
This kind of sense that strongman politics is the trend, it leads to things like what we're seeing in Kashmir.
Part of Modi's appeal is his promise to spur economic growth in a country where more than 250 million people live on less than $2 a day. India has bounced on and off the list of the fastest-growing global economies.
The growth rate during the 5 years was 7.5%. That is very respectable growth rate for a large democracy such as India.
We saw with Modi, he was kind of moving in two contradictory directions. There was a part of him that wanted to be this kind of reformer, who was going to modernize India, evolve its economy, and play a greater role on the world stage. And then there was this kind of unreconstructed Hindu nationalism that is very belligerent and has roots in, frankly, fascism.
The Indian economy has very, very high points. We know about high tech, the fact that it's attracted American companies for their call centers. The Indian educated classes have command of English, and so they are a natural partner for a very, very many American enterprises.
Despite its success, India's growth has not benefited everyone. Uneven economic development has exacerbated a deep divide between rich and poor.
I don't want to fall into stereotypes because, in other words, then everybody says India is a bunch of poor people groveling around. But there are people actually who are so poor that they eat the rice out of a rat's body. And that's not a fairy tale.
The Indian poor, even if they have come up from where they were, still remain extremely poor. Whereas the Indian rich, the 0.1%, are rich by global standards.
If the economy grows, there is always going to be a trickle-down effect to everybody, especially if it continues to grow at 6, 7, 8, preferably 8 to 9% a year. Then it starts growing because if you become a $5 trillion economy, the government has a lot of resources to help with social programs to bring in the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid up above.
Both Indian and foreign investors are worried that corruption and red tape continue to hinder innovation. The Modi government has made headway addressing these issues, but there is still much more to do.
It's referred to as license Raj, that it was something almost exported from the UK, imposed during the age of imperialism, this system of bureaucracy, and then given its own Indian characteristics, and that it still very much complicates and inhibits some of the faster growth.
Historically, I would say corruption and red tape have been a real drag. I mean, if you look, why was India such a low number in terms of basis of ease of doing business? Corruption has seeped into every aspect of India.
The government in recent years has done a pretty good job of moving most auctions of government resources to relatively transparent online and a little bit more hands-off. But when you get outside of the main lanes, the central government, the size of deals that the government pays a lot of attention to, that's where corruption and transparency still remains an issue.
Increasingly, India is competing with China for regional influence. Just 3 days after the Indian election, China's vice president hurried to Pakistan. China has committed more than $60 billion to construct an economic corridor in Pakistan, and Modi's victory demanded a show of solidarity.
Pakistan is China's secondary deterrent to India. As long as India and Pakistan are in conflict, 500,000 Indian troops will be on the Pakistan-India border and therefore not free to be on the China-India border. So therefore, China has a long-term partnership with Pakistan. It helped Pakistan with its nuclear weapons and with its missile design, etc., all because it wants Pakistan to remain at loggerheads with India.
On the other hand, they recognize that India is a much larger economic behemoth that they must work with because there is a huge amount of trade involved. And Modi and Xi have made many more times than Modi and Trump.
China has challenged India's influence in several other nearby countries, including Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Modi shows no sign of backing down.
Well, look, it's a battle for influence and primacy in that part of the world. And India and China and the United States and others are really competing quite furiously.
China has a long-term strategy of containing India's influence in its immediate neighborhood. The former Sri Lankan government gave the Chinese a lot of concessions. The Chinese built a huge port. Unfortunately, that port is not commercially productive. So the Chinese then said, okay, because we have lent you so much money, we'll take that over. That enables the Chinese to have a foothold for any future military plans that they might have.
They're building a new port in Gwadar, Pakistan, They attempted to dive in deep in Maldives, potentially acquiring an island in the Maldives right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So India looks around and sees an increased China presence. And when they look around their own neighborhood and see that China has made real inroads in the Indian Ocean region, it gives them some concern.
In the private sector, competition between China and India is intense.
We've seen India has been one of the bright spots in the global economy leading up to the trade war. And many have talked about India being the next China.
It breaks down pretty closely between the fact that India has a pretty strong internationally competitive services sector. Think of IT services, think of call centers, think of software development. Think of Hollywood and Bollywood. Think of the ability to produce films and television content that's viewed as, at the leading edge of it is viewed world class today. China still is a much more attractive destination for manufacturing investment. The fact that you've got terrific infrastructure, you've got a relatively stable regulatory environment, you have provincial leaders in China that seem to want and run after and try to attract investment.
India faces a number of obstacles. GDP growth isn't in the double digits. It's 7% at most. It's not quite at the 12 to 13% that China even enjoyed as recently as 10 years ago. One of the reasons why India struggles is because of infrastructure. A second one is simply the labor market, that India's labor market remains heavily regulated. And then a third factor that sort of has slowed India's rise is the fact that it hasn't invested sufficiently in its own human development. So we haven't seen high levels of investment in education. Literacy rates still lag China's by a considerable amount.
It remains to be seen whether India and the U.S. can work together to bring stability and prosperity to South Asia. The countries have many shared goals, but a rocky history of cooperation.
We're two democracies. It's a oft-used phrase, but the United States is the oldest democracy in the world, and India is the largest.
20 years ago, the U.S.-India relationship was in a bad place. India had tested a nuclear weapon. The United States had put sanctions on India and Pakistan, which had done the same thing. I think almost immediately, American leaders realized maybe sanctioning India, the world's largest democracy, a country where we have a huge diaspora population in the United States, a whole bunch of technical talent, a big future market, maybe that's not the right way to go.
India is so big that it has its own inertia, and the result of that is they can do a lot of things without having to reach out, which other countries have to do. That gives some real benefits to India, and for that matter, in our dealing with India. So we want them as a partner, they want us as a partner, and it's been a good relationship in recent times.
India and the U.S. regarded one another with suspicion throughout the Cold War.
After independence, we lined up quite strongly behind India. President Truman and President Eisenhower were actually quite enthused, not sure which way India would go. Would it be aligned with the West? Would it be aligned with a growing Soviet power, or would it take its own course?
We have an interest in a stable, growing subcontinent. And therefore, when we discuss aid with India, it is not in the context of India asking us for a special favor, but of defining joint objectives.
President Nixon became enamored of Pakistan when he visited Pakistan as vice president way back in 1953. He went to India and asked the Indians to join America against the Soviets, and the Indians said, why should we? We want to be non-aligned. President Nixon interpreted that as India wanting to be neutral. India said, no, it's not neutrality. Non-alignment means we will get from the Soviets what we need, and we will get from you what we need.
But now, the rapidly growing economic relationship is bringing Washington and New Delhi closer together.
President Clinton wanted to have a different relationship with India. He was very skillful in helping to negotiate between India and Pakistan, and then he made a very historic visit to India in the year 2000. He was warmly welcomed. He said it was time for a different U.S.-India relationship.
I do believe if we can lead the region, or you can, away from the proliferation of dangerous weapons toward the proliferation of new ideas, new companies, and new technologies, away from the kind of racial and ethnic tensions that we see now in the trouble spots in South Asia, toward the sort of harmony I saw in that little village yesterday, then the dreams that your chief minister spoke of are well within your grasp.
India had to open up. That was number one, because they realized that closed socialist system is not working. So when they opened up, which was the country which had the largest dynamic economy, which was United States. So there were synergies, the shared values, democracy, capitalism, rule of law.
Obviously, India is a huge nation and works as a balance to China as we continue forward.
In 2016, the Obama administration named India a major defense partner, the only country to receive such a designation. The idea was to use closer ties to balance China's expansion.
Major defense partner was this unique designation we have given to no other country that recognizes the role that India plays, again, as a democratic powerhouse that supports a free and open Indo-Pacific, but yet doesn't want to be a treaty ally.
Bringing India into discussions about security issues in the Asia-Pacific, was a piece of this. It wasn't to kind of keep China down. It was to try to have the capacity to shape the context in which China is going to inevitably be playing a greater role.
India is one of the largest buyers of defense equipment, and the United States happens to be one of the largest exporters of defense equipment, state-of-the-art technology. And so I think those things have kind of brought the two countries together.
Donald Trump has shifted towards a more transactional relationship with India. The long-term impact remains unclear.
We have many things to discuss, and one of them, and perhaps in our case, one of the biggest ones, is trade. The relationship has never been better, I say, than it is right now.
But President Trump's global trade war is a source of anxiety.
I think the Trump administration has recognized the importance of India, to the United States, and I think that they have made a very positive effort to try to cultivate that relationship, and going forward, I think they'll do more.
I would say from the year 2000 through the end of 2017 into early 2018, there was a common architecture about the United States' approach to India. President Trump has decided to reverse that formula. Trade and investment, certain transactionalism has become more important. And that's just his approach. I think he's running and implementing this policy based on what he thinks he heard from the American people.
Right now, I think you've got the relationship moving on two different paths. So on defense and security, we've managed to sign a number of new agreements that allow our militaries to work more closely together. The downside is we have an administration in the United States that seems to be fighting a trade war against the world.
Trump's pledge to reform the visa process for highly skilled guest workers has also roiled many critics in India.
You know, the H-1B program, for people who are not as familiar, it's supposed to allow companies in the United States, when they cannot find American workers despite a lot of effort. President Trump is focused on it because I would say there have been some abuses of the program. But the reality is, in this country, in the technology world, in the biotechnology world, the pharma world, healthcare world, we need talent.
It's not purely political also, there's economic significance to it, because India is a major supplier of IT services to the United States, and these H-1B visas are therefore helpful for them to build the bridge to be able to bring some of their tech workers here.
It's no surprise that the president has gone after this. I think it fits into his political narrative about cracking down on immigration. I don't think he cares whether you're coming from India or South America or Africa or other parts of Asia. I think he's looking to limit the number of foreign-born people outside of Europe who are coming to the United States, and I think this, unfortunately, fits into that narrative. And when I think about my dad's own story of showing up in New York City with 14 bucks in a bus ticket, and I could go back and represent the United States as ambassador 50 years later, that's an American story, and I hope we don't lose that in our kind of current fight to limit immigration to the United States.
Going forward, policymakers must determine whether Modi's India, bold, confrontational, and poised for dramatic growth, can be a reliable partner in a dangerous region.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet in community centers, libraries, places of worship, and homes across the country to discuss global issues with their community. Participants read the 8-topic briefing book, meet to discuss each topic, and complete a ballot, which shares their views with Congress. To start or join a discussion group in your community, visit fpa.org or call 1-800-477-5836. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. DELAVAN Foundation.